Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I love to start on time so we can end on time. Um, Welcome to the Access and the Georgia Milestones, Resources and Strategies for Math Constructed Response and Extended Responses. Our webinars will be mainly centered around the constructed responses that our students may see on the spring administration of the Georgia Milestones. This is the 8th grade session, number 1. I am Sawanda Coffey, the math mentor here at West Georgia RESA. And of course, I want to start off by just providing a basic purpose of what we are doing here at West Georgia RESA. We are providing this or these webinars as, just another resource for your teachers, if you are an administrator, your colleagues, but it's just another resource that you can reference to. So you'll be able to use some of these example assessment items in your classrooms to help prepare your students for that test. Due to the time frame of the webinars, most of the time we will be able to get through 1 to 2 items. This is the initial month, so today we'll only be reviewing 1 assessment item. In months to come, we'll have more items that you'll be able to take back to your classes to actually go through with your students. Let me just tell you the basic format of the webinar so you can, they're pretty much going to be formatted the same. If you joined me for a previous webinar, my themes are the same for the grade levels. So this is middle school and this is the last session. So my theme has pretty much been the same, but the formats will be the same for each and at each grade level. These webinars are provided for grades 3 through 10. So of course, if you have any coworkers, friends, family members that teach those grade levels, then, just have them to register and, join. As long as you register for the webinars, I will still send out the link to the recordings as well as the PowerPoints. So if you wanted to actually go back and use the PowerPoints in your own professional learning at your schools, then you're free to do that. Let's talk about some norms, of course. If you notice, you are muted. And the reason for everyone being muted during the presentation is just to cut down on the feedback that you may experience in your different locations. Also, you may type in questions during the presentation. There's a question box located in your setup when you first set it up. So if you do have any questions, please type those questions. If I'm not able to get to the questions, then I will provide answers to your questions via email at the end of or after the webinar is over. And lastly, at the end of each of the presentations, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA site. If you travel to the West Georgia RESA site, there's a tab that will say services. Under that tab, you will see recorded webinars. So anytime you want to go back and reference a webinar or you miss one, they will be located there within the 24 hours of you actually listening or the scheduled webinar. Going back to the actual format before we go any further, once again, there will be standards that will be highlighted, if you would say, each month related to the assessment item that we're going to be reviewing. I'll also provide the lesson essential question related to that assessment item, and also have the standards for mathematical practice aligned to the assessment item. And then we will also look at some scored, most times we'll look at some scored student work just for you to get an idea of, the feedback that was provided to the actual student that completed the assessment item previously. Just a recap of the Georgia milestones. Of course, grades 3 through 10 will be experiencing the Georgia milestones in some way or another. But the 3 item types that we will see is the selected response, which is, of course, the multiple choice section that we all know about. And we know that that is for all content areas. And talk about constructed response, of course, for ELA and mathematics. and extended response in ELA and mathematics. Now, the constructed response and extended response may come at different grade levels. So you may want to check the Georgia DOE website to make sure if your grade level test is going to cover one or both of those. But just talk about the actual definition, we would say, for the constructed response is, of course, it is just another term that is used, for the assessment item that require the student to generate a response as opposed to selecting a response. Now, when we talk about extended response, those are items that require more elaborate answers and explanations of reasoning. They may allow for multiple correct answers or varying ways to actually answer the actual item. I will say up front, when we go through the assessment items, the goal for what we want to accomplish with our students is, of course, first, using the item to create a thought process with our students. We really want to guide them in understanding the process that it takes to answer the question. That should be our first and most important strategy that we use, is just allowing the kids or guiding the kids through a process of actually answering the question. And then once they've come up with an actual process, then having them to articulate that process into writing, complete sentences. And then our last objective is to actually, guide the students into answering the question itself. Okay, the standard and lesson essential question for today is EE7B, solve linear equations with rational number coefficients, including equations whose solutions require expanding expressions using the distributive property and collecting like terms. Now, around this time, some of you all probably are on the current unit that covers this standard. If not, you should be getting there very soon. The lesson essential question that relates to this assessment item is, how do we solve linear equations with rational number coefficients? The standards for mathematical practice, if you are not familiar with these, but these are basically those practices that we want to demonstrate as teachers, as well as strive to have the students demonstrate certain behaviors. So what I will be providing most times is the standards for mathematical practice that are aligned to the assessment item. So starting off, it's always going to be standard one. Standard one is the standard for mathematical practice that should be demonstrated in every single one of your lessons. And it says to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So some teacher behaviors that are related to this standard for mathematical practice is, of course, providing which problems align to the standards and providing appropriate time for students to engage in productive struggle of problem solving. I like to emphasize these two teacher behaviors just because they are so important if we want to guide our students to becoming more accountable for their learning, and just provide those different experiences when it comes to math, and providing appropriate time for students to engage in a productive struggle. It is okay to allow the kids a little time to, gather their thoughts, to think about what angle they want to take to actually, attack the problem. So it's okay to let them, struggle for a little while. Now, some questions that you may ask as you're going through and trying to demonstrate this standard is, how is blank's way of solving the problem like or different from your own? Or does your plan make sense? Why not? Now, this is an opportunity to allow our students to actually, converse with each other, having that dialogue visible. And in our classrooms, it lets us know that students are free to think. They're also able to, use someone else to help them gather their thoughts and come up with a logical answer. And some student behaviors would be checking answers and making sure solutions are reasonable and make sense. we will see in this assessment item that we will be reviewing today, you'll see where a student actually was able to do that. Discussing the meaning of the problem with classmates. Once again, that comes back to the teacher questioning, but having the kids discuss the meaning with other classmates, then like once again, that helps the student become more comfortable with what's going on in the class, and they may gather additional ideas and more strategies to help them solve their problem. The next standard is standard 4. It is modeled with mathematics. And some teacher behaviors related to this is providing opportunities for students to solve problems in real world context. We hear a lot about that, but finding those opportunities where you can bring those real world examples into your classes. Secondly, identifying problem solving contexts connected to student interest. I think this is also a very important technique to use. Once again, we have different students in our classes. So if we're able to actually bring in problems that they can really relate to, they could be related to sports, it could be related to history. Just being able to know our students and catering to what they need and actually answer the content that we are providing to them would be a great increase in their knowledge. Some questions that you may ask as a teacher is, can you write a number sentence to describe this situation? Once again, the standards of mathematical practice that I am providing to you through the webinar is aligned to the assessment item in some way or another. And another question that you may ask is, what connections do you see? If your students are able to explain to you or identify connections between what they're currently being taught in something that may have been covered in a previous unit or even previous grade level, then you know that they are on the right track to understanding what it is that they're currently supposed to be doing. Student behaviors that we would like the students to demonstrate is making connections between different mathematical representations, whether that's concrete or algebraic, but having them to make those connections using those different representations. Okay, the last standard for mathematical practice related to today's assessment item is standard 6. As I stated with standard 1, standard 6 is another one of those SMPs that should be demonstrated in every single lesson that you present in your class. So standard 6 is attend to precision. And some teacher behaviors related to that is explicitly teaching mathematics vocabulary. This can never be understated. It should always be some part of your lesson every day. It could be after your warm up or your bell work, after the students complete that, after they come into the room. There could be a little block of time just used for teaching that mathematics vocabulary, or it could be a closer. Another behavior for teachers is insisting on accurate use of academic language from students. And we want them to use that academic language in complete sentences. Of course, a question, what does the word blank mean? Whatever that explicit vocabulary you may be teaching them, have them to explain what you did to solve the problem using that academic vocabulary. Some student behaviors: communicating precisely using clear language and accurate mathematics vocabulary. Once again, we want to encourage students to use the correct vocabulary that we've taught them, because the more that they are using it, then the more they're, understand it in different aspects and different contexts. And deciding when to estimate or give an exact answer. This would be something if you're not very comfortable with, but just deciding what is the actual context of the problem talking about. So an example may be if you're talking the difference between bacterial growth and just people. when would be the best time to estimate or give an exact answer? Okay. Before we go any further, I would just like to make sure that everyone understands that the assessment items that are being presented, I am highlighting a resource each month that has been suggested from the Georgia DOE as, just a great area or a great state or a great resource to use that has some great questions. So I'm highlighting Engage New York this month for all of my grade level content areas. So today's question is solve the equation below for D. You have 0.2, and then you have in parentheses D minus 6 is equal to 0.3D plus 5 minus 3 plus 0.1D. Now, what I always like for the participants to do in the webinars is to see if you can actually answer this question. As you answer this question, I want you to think about the standards for mathematical practice that we just went through, and that was standard 1, standard 4, and standard 6. Because if we as teachers, if we actually practice what we want, our students to do, then it becomes easier. It becomes easier for us to teach. And then of course, for the students, it will become easier for them to understand what to do when they are addressed with these types of problems. Okay. First, let's look at some strategies to address the problem. I will say up front, this is just one problem-solving framework. I am introducing it to you all because I thought it was very interesting that this can be used at any aspect in our classrooms. It is adapted from Robert Kaplinski, and that name may be familiar to you because there are a lot of the 3X tasks inside of the Georgia DOE frameworks that reference his work. So I attended a workshop with him a couple of months ago, and he presented this to the group. So on the problem solving framework, the first question is, what problem are you trying to figure out? That is, of course, what is the prompt? What is the question asking us to do? What guesses do you have? When this was presented to us, it is used, so we can increase the dialogue in our classes amongst our students. So how this would play out in your class and is in this way. You would first, provide the students with a question. And then next, you would just pretty much, ask the students to come up with a guess and start prompting answers from the students. So say if the first answer was 15. The next thing that you would do is continue to do this for answers that are lower than 15. So you would gather all of the responses, and you're creating an environment where students are free to feel like, okay, at this time, my answer means something. Okay. So say if you polled all the students that have answers that are lower than 15 and you come up with the lowest answer being 5. You continue this process for the students that have answers that are greater than 15. And say if the highest number after doing this so many times is 20. Now you can just say to your class, okay, class, we know our answer is between 5 and 20. Now at this time, once again, all you've done is created more dialogue amongst your students. Every student feel like at this time, okay, my answer is okay. They're not afraid to share their answer. The next is, what do you already know from the problem? These are specific things that are located in the problem. Well, it could be the vocabulary, it could be just the symbols but they are already provided to the student in the problem. Next is, what do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, this travels back to one of those standards for mathematical practice. If your student can tell you exactly what they need in order to solve the problem, then you know they have a good understanding of what is being asked and what they probably need to do to actually come up with an answer. Okay, next is what should we title this problem or lesson? This question may seem odd at this point, but after you went through this problem solving framework with your students, at this point, you want to just bring them back to what are we really focused on doing. So you may title the problem, which may be very close to the actual prompt of the assessment item. Provide all of your work while working on the problem. You should provide the students with either a section or something where they can write down and work out their problem in any way that they would like. If they want to write vocabulary words and define them, or they want to write notes for symbols, write number sentences, just having a section where they could write down everything that they have thought about to help them solve the problem. The last of the problem solving framework is, what is your conclusion and how did you reach that conclusion? Well, the last bulleted item is designed for students to write their response in complete sentences. This problem solving framework, I will say, can be used in all aspects of the classroom, whether it is in whole group, small group. They can use it individually on skill work or, small tasks, and also those long performance tasks that the Georgia DOE has in our frameworks. I would start off or suggest an excellent way to begin to integrate this process is, of course, to use it in a whole group setting. And then as time goes on and the students become more familiar with the process, then you can start, letting them maybe pair up with a partner and go through the process. Okay, this is an example rubric. We're about to actually see the assessment item in just a second. The 2-point holistic rubric. Once again, this is highlighted from the Engage New York. So if a student scores 2 points, then that response indicates that the student has completed the task correctly, using mathematically sound procedures, contains sufficient work to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts and/or procedures. It may contain inconsequential errors that do not distract from the correct solution. If a student scores 1 point, then that response pretty much is correctly addresses only some elements of the task. It may contain an incorrect solution, but applies a mathematically appropriate process. And it may contain the correct solution, but some of the work is incomplete. Then lastly, if a student scores 0 points, then the response is pretty much just incorrect, irrelevant, incoherent. And if you look at the problem holistically, it does not provide a great demonstration that the student really knows what's going on. So think about that. And once again, this is just that 2-point rubric that is used from this particular resource. Now, the DOE currently has webinars that are out there that use a different rubric. And of course, I'll integrate those in the future webinars, but just choose a rubric that is great for you. I've recently heard of teachers actually, and I think is a good practice, if you create a rubric with your class, if they have, you have your expectations, and then, have the students to actually build the rubric so they'll know up front what the expectations are. Okay, let's look at this first scored student work. Once again, the problem, we look at some of the work where they have 0.2 times d minus 6 equals 0.3 d plus 5 minus 3 plus 0.1 d. And just take a minute to look through the work. Student uses distributive property. Remember, that was part of the standard. So their final answer came out to be D is equal to negative 16. Once again, I advise that, if you were actually working out the problem, hopefully you came out with the right answer. Now let's look at the bottom piece, right, where the student actually took that standard for mathematical practice and demonstrated that by using the answer to go back and actually check their work. So this student did score 2 points out of 2. And the feedback that was provided is the response answers the question correctly and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the mathematic concepts. The equation is correctly solved for D using mathematically sound procedures. Okay, now let's look at student number 2 and their scored work. We see just by the arrows, they had an idea of using the distributive property. And here, I see they may have been combining their like terms, putting those together. But their final answer came out to be 16. And what do you notice? And at this time, if you were actually grading this would be one of those moments where you can provide additional feedback to the students yourself. But let's look at the feedback for this student. They scored 1 point out of 2. The response is only partially correct. The response applies a mathematically appropriate process. So as stated before, we want to guide our students into understanding the process. And once they've understood that process, then being able to articulate that into writing and then being able to solve the problem. And so that is very, very important, where they receive points in this assessment item just for the process, having the correct process. But of course, they ended up with 16, a positive 16 instead of a negative 16. Okay, and last, this is student number 3, and they scored 0 out of 2 points. And looking at, after they got down to around step 3 or 4, their mistake at that point in time is they completely deleted or got rid of the D, which in essence they were solving for. They continued to go on and come up with an answer. So of course the response is incorrect. Computational and procedure errors initially show no solution once they actually got rid of the D. So of course they earned 0 out of 2 points. And once again, these are times where we can actually provide those things to our students. Which next comes the feedback. I am a true believer in providing students with written or verbal feedback, and I think it should be given quite frequently. If you're not, demonstrating this or providing this to your students, then maybe starting tomorrow, you may want to find out how you can integrate that into your lesson plans. Make sure you have some time for that. But as we're going throughout, the evaluation process in our buildings these days, and we're getting those walkthroughs completed on us and the feedback, we want to know how can we become better. So we deserve, to provide that to the students as well. They deserve to be given those instructions that they need to see how can they, become better at mastering the standard. Feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps in moving towards mastering the standard. Not just providing the student with the mistakes, but how to, give them some suggestions of how you move to the next thing. Or if they've mastered it, then okay, what is the next thing in line for them? So always having that available to them is always good to provide some type of written feedback to each and every one of your students about every other week. Because that's about how many times you could probably get to them. And lastly, use the language of the standards when providing feedback. Once again, whatever standard that you may be teaching at that time and you provide that feedback, just go back and use some of the language of that standard so the students will, be more familiar with what their goal is when it comes to that standard. Okay, we will be ending a little early, but I did want to provide you with the references and talk about a couple of more things before we dismiss. Of course, each month, as I stated before, I will be highlighting a resource, like a resource of the month. And this month it was Engage New York. I'll provide the link to their website. I would suggest, go looking at some of their assessment items, looking for their scored student work as well. Of course, the Georgia frameworks, this is a great area for us to go back and look at some of those performance tasks, integrate those so we can allow our students to, become accustomed to writing complete sentences and using those real world examples. Now, what I did not speak about in the beginning, I don't think, is the Georgia DOE currently has some webinars that are out there. And the webinars that we are providing through the West Georgia RESA are not in lieu of the ones that the DOE have out there. They have them for elementary, middle school, and high school math. So I would definitely, visit this website, look at those webinars, because that's, once again, is an additional resource that we can use as teachers to help, guide our students into becoming better students and gain extra knowledge about what the Georgia Milestones will look like in the spring. Once again, resources will be coming more in the future. This is just one, and I thought it would be a good strategy if we could just introduce one resource each month to allow, you all as the teachers to, get used to that particular resource. I know we're overwhelmed. We have a lot to do, but I do definitely, want for you all to have more than one resource available to you to help prepare your students. Okay, if there are no additional questions, and I don't see any, but if you have any questions at any time, you can always email me. I will be sending you out a link to the recording as well as the PowerPoint. So I thank you again for your time and have a terrific Tuesday.